Hi everyone, this is Margarita with CityGal Puppetry. I wanted to share my Father's Day cards with you, along with some bonus masculine cards that I created using the same papers that I created the first two cards with that you just saw. I was determined not to leave any scraps behind, so I did make additional cards with whatever papers I had left. If you saw there in the beginning, that was the pattern that I decided to use. I do have a notepad where I sketch my own card designs, and that is the one that I'm going to be going with for the first card. Here I'm just cutting out some of the zigzag pattern. I want to create a strip from that. You can see that right on the left hand side there. And I'm going to go ahead and start trimming down my solid colored paper that came from a different paper pad. Colors match really well. The final card is going to be an A2 size card. It will be 5.5 by 4.25. I go ahead and adhere my strip to my light blue mat. This is a long video, so I do try to get through everything. There are four cards that I'm covering in this one video. Now I'm looking for the center of the card at the bottom, and then I mark 1/2 inch from each side of the center there. The center would be 2 inches since it's 4 inches in width. And now I'm going 2 inches from that point to the edge of the card to cut off the corners. I mark both corners, but I still like to use one corner to measure the other, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. I really hate measuring things. I'm just not good at it, but I do like to cut off one corner. If I'm gonna cut off two corners like this, I tend to do this with tags usually, and then as you can see, I use the cut off corner to measure the other corner just to make sure that they're going to be exactly the same. So my pencil mark was a little bit off the first time. Now I realized I wanted to emboss my blue mat with that embossing folder it's got a quilted pattern to it. It's really pretty, and it's definitely can be either masculine or feminine. So I give my paper some texture. It has that stitching in a quilted sort of pattern. And then I put my strip back on the top, and I add this nice glitter tape to the strip right across. Now I am going to be measuring off a piece to cover the bottom of that mat in the contrasting darker blue. Again, I'm so bad at measuring, so I just used the top cover to measure, since it's going to be going exactly on top of that. I go ahead and trim that out. Then I also trace over the same shape from the polka dot paper. This is going to be, I actually cut it like about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the line that I traced, because I wanted to have that dark blue paper as a border. So once that's all measured up, I make sure that I lift it up just a little bit, and then I trace a line so that it will also have a border on the top. Now that it's all cut out to the way that I want, I go ahead and tape that to the bottom darker paper, and then the whole thing gets adhered to the mat. I now work on my sentiment. It's just a Father's Day wishes sentiment stamp that you can see there on the left. And I do emboss this. There's my embossing buddy. I do emboss it in silver. I stamp it down with my embossing ink and put the powder on it, and then I cover everything up. I have blown my embossing powder before, so you definitely want to cover your embossing powder, and I don't want to dry out the pad, so I close that as well. And then I go ahead and use my heat tool to melt the powder. I use these shape scissors to cut the sides in a zigzag. I like that it looks almost like it looks like a ticket. And then I use this corrugated navy colored piece of paper or I should say corrugated cardboard in navy to use as a background for the sentiment. And then I adhere that down as well. I use lots of tape behind the light blue sentiment piece because I want to make sure that it's going to stick really well on the corrugated paper or cardboard. And then you can see it fits perfectly right in the center. So I bring in my card base. It is top folding. And now I'm going to measure the bottom corners to cut those off as well, leaving a white border. I don't measure the thickness, but it's approximately 1/8 of an inch. And I did the same thing again. I basically trace both corners that I want to cut off, but once I cut the first corner, I use that to measure the second corner. So once that's all done, you can still see some of the exposed corners of the inside from the inside of the card. So I put down some tape, and then I add some more of that pattern zigzag paper on the inside of the card, and I trim that off as well. This is me just trying not to have to measure anything. So now you can see the pattern on the corners at the bottom, which is actually on the inside of the card. So I'm happy with that. I go ahead and lay some tape down all along the back, and I adhere that to the top front of the card base. And that is my first Father's Day card. Now with the leftovers, I use this pattern or that design to create the next card. My son is helping me here. You can tell by his hands that he's been painting. Didn't wash his hands properly. So I'm cutting this down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. This is going to be a mat for the card. And this is going to be that banner that's going to go down the middle. It's 2 1/4. I forget the length of it. It doesn't really matter. It's probably about 3 inches long. And then I create a bottom mat for that as well. Now I put my background paper in this embossing folder that has wonky polka dots on it. And I run that through my Cuttlebug. In case anyone was wondering how you get those patterns on the paper. And so now I have all those polka dots embossed on my background, and I bring out my banner, and this is how I do what I call faux mat. I don't have enough paper to cover the entire back of the mat, the dark blue paper. So I'm just going to take 2 L-shaped strips, and I glue them to opposite corners. So I glue one to the top right corner and then the bottom left corner. And you'll see how I do that in just a moment. And I do this anytime that I want to have the contrast paper behind my mat, but I don't have enough paper to do that with. So it still gives the illusion that there's something back there. It just doesn't make a full border all the way around. And And I like that it kind of creates an interesting look to the card, and it keeps the eye moving along the card. So now I go ahead and add the banner to the front, and then another piece of glitter tape to the bottom. And then with that white strip of paper, I prep the paper with my embossing buddy because I'm going to emboss again. And I use my other Happy Father's Day sentiment stamp, and I silver emboss that as well. Then I cut that down to a nice strip that I'm going to use as a sentiment on the front of my card. Now I prop that up with foam tape. Center it down, and my mat is ready to be placed onto my card base. So you can see there the L-shaped pieces that I put in the back. That's my faux mat. I go ahead and adhere that on top, and there's my completed card. Now I have paper left over, so as I said, I want to use everything that I have. So there's another card design that I am going to use with some of the remaining paper, and I go ahead and create my first mat, and I am making sure that it lines up well. I use some of that glitter tape right along the top. And then I take the white mat that's going to be behind the polka dotted paper, and I just freehand cut out a rectangle from the middle that I'm going to use as a mat for the navy blue or the darker blue zigzag paper. So again, I do this just to save paper. I don't like to constantly use new paper for things. I try to conserve as much as I can and use as much as I can. So you can see there, I use the middle for that square. And now I go ahead and adhere that down because you're only going to see the border, remember, so you don't really need the middle. And I trim some off of the sides, just give it a thinner border. And then I go ahead and cut clean edges along the square. I mean, it's not an exact square, but you know, that piece that looks like a square. And now I'm working on my sentiments. I do take this mustache stamp and I emboss it onto the white piece of paper. I stamped it twice because it's a new stamp, so I wasn't sure how clean it was going to stamp down. So whichever is the best of the two, that's what I go with. Now I didn't prep my paper with the embossing buddy, so some static caused some of the powder to stick in other places beside where it was stamped. Once I emboss that, I fussy cut the mustache out, leaving a white border around it. And now for the sentiment, that's part of the same stamp set. I use Chip Sapphire Distress ink, and I go ahead and ink up my stamp, and it says "like a sir," period. I'm not sure why there's a period there, but it's part of the stamp. And then I cut it down to a really thin strip, as thin as I can get it. And I plan on placing that right above the mustache. I trim it down to make sure that it fits in the center. And then I give it some fishtail banner corners. And now I'm ready to adhere both the mustache and the sentiment. I run them through my little Xyron sticker maker. I press that down really well, just make sure it's burnished on there. And then I go ahead and stick both the mustache and the sentiment onto the center of the card in the square. I use a piece of foam to go ahead and adhere that down to the card base so that it has some dimension. And I like to do this especially when I have a white border against a white card base. I think that the dimension helps to make the border more visible. And now that card is complete. So you can see there's still some leftover paper. So I go ahead and create another card. I'm cutting down a piece of white paper to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I see that there are several strips around. So I go ahead, grab the corrugated cardboard, and I cut that down so that I have 2 thick strips. Cut it right down the middle. I freehanded, of course. And then I give it fishtail banner edges on both pieces. Pretty much this is going to be a card with just a bunch of strips that have fishtail banners on them. And I just kind of lay them all out onto the card mat in sort of a pattern. I try not to cut them out perfectly because I wanted it to look more whimsical. I didn't want it to be like this sort of concrete, straight strips of paper on there. Once I'm happy with all my strips, I start to glue them down. And so I start the bottom straight, but then the rest of them I leave slightly off so they're not exactly straight. And so I sort of have a pattern going, but I don't use one of the navy strips because I didn't have enough space. And then I take this sentiment die that says hooray, and I cut it out of that glitter paper. I also cut it out of a piece of white cardstock just to layer it on. And then I grab this piece of craft paper, and I'm also going to use those little balloon dies to cut out little balloons from this craft paper. I cut out as many balloons as I can, but I only use 3 and I don't use the heart shape. So you see here I'm layering the white hooray with the silver one, the silver glitter. And then I glue that to the top of my card right on the top corrugated cardboard strip. And I've already used some foam tape to adhere twine to my balloons, which I'm now going to be placing down onto my mat. And I use glue along the string to shape it down how I want. It can get kind of messy doing this, but I find it's the best way to get not realistic looking balloons, but it's a balloon that looks like it has a natural hanging string rather than it's just falling straight down or hanging in the air. This is my second balloon. On this string I try to create a loop, which can be kind of tricky. Now you definitely want to have or to use glue that is going to dry clear and matte. This glue, you can't really see it once it's dry, but you don't really want to be able to see the glue if it's really shiny, because you're going to get glue in other places besides the string once it's all said and done. And this is me trying to rub out some of the glue that I got in the wrong place. And then I also put down a third balloon. So that completes that mat, and then I go ahead and prop that up as well on foam, on a piece of foam sheet. And that completes that card. Now this is what I have left. I decided to make one more card. I don't have a design for this one. I'm just going with what pieces I have, and I just create just a random design that fits some of the leftovers on it. Now my goal here was to create masculine looking cards. I will probably have some additional videos making masculine cards. I think that's something that sometimes we have a hard time with, because it tends to be very easy to find materials and patterns and die cuts and things like that for feminine cards, but not so much for masculine cards. So here I'm cutting whatever was left of the silver glitter paper, and I run that right down the middle of those two pieces that connect. So this way you can't see where they are glued together. And I cut off a little banner tail from that, and I glue it down once I'm happy and it measures right along the top. And then I grab a couple more pieces that are lying around and I glue them down. Now, I feel that looking at this card now, I should have also embossed some pattern onto, or pattern texture onto the right side of that dark blue paper. You know, on the top, on the right side is just dark blue paper, but probably would have been nicer with an embossing folder texture on it. I still like how it came out though. So here I'm adding a banner to the front center at the bottom of that zigzag piece. And then I use a wishes die. I cut that out 3 times and I layered them one on top of the other so that it looks dimensional. Instead of the dot for the eye, I used a rhinestone. And once that was done, I went ahead and adhered it, and that's my completed card. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do so if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a great Father's Day.